Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Biz Bites, where we try and unpack some of the stories of some of the great businesses that are around. And I'm really excited today. I have got Brian and Prue joining me, and they are an interesting combination because there's one business that's grown out of another. They're both heading those businesses, and they're both going to try and get a few words in here together. So we're going to enjoy this conversation for a bit. So I guess let's start with you, Brian, and ask you to introduce the business initially and what your part of the business focuses on.
Okay, well, there's Franchise Simply is a business that was created about 11 or 12 years ago with the intention of making a cloud-based consulting business, which was something quite different in the franchise consulting space, and in fact still is today. I get interest from people overseas and so forth, and I suppose Prue and I had never worked together before that. We had our own careers. I've been in franchising for close to 4 decades, but Prue's background is town planning, environmental planning, and board level at fairly senior public corporations. So systems and processes are her natural fit. And if you're looking at franchising, the more we look into it as the years progress and the sector matures, the more evident it is that systems are absolutely critical. So it was really the fact that Prue initially was her idea. We put this business together, Franchise Simply, and then from that evolved the fact that a lot of people we speak to, they don't necessarily want to franchise their business, but they want their business to look like a franchise and run like a franchise. And I suppose that's an endorsement of any business. If someone says, is your business a franchise? People understand to be flattered because it gives the impression it's really well systemized. So hence Systems2Grow. And it wasn't by design, but actually the two businesses, and Prue and I, with our relative backgrounds and skills, are actually an ideal fit for this particular combination because the two businesses intertwine as well. People who've got well systemized businesses often think they'd like to grow them, and franchising is one way. And people who've got franchise businesses often realise they need to systemize them in more detail. And other standalone businesses, whether they're startups or been around for 20 years, and we work with people across the board, some surprising people we work with who you would assume had very well documented businesses. In actual fact, often it's not the case. They fly not exactly by the seat of their pants, but probably with less confidence and less delegation than they should do.
Well, before we introduce Prue and that part of the business, I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper. When you talked about being in that kind of area for 4 decades, tell me a little bit about what's motivated you to get into franchising in the first place. What's the backstory to that one?
I got into it by accident. 40 years ago, there was a huge bank disruption here. Interest rates, as you probably may have heard, were 18% for a domestic mortgage. I was a building contractor. I had a development business, and I had some development sites, and I was paying 23% interest. And my funder rolled over and closed the doors, and so I had to. The building industry, really, I was in Perth at that stage. It just wasn't. You couldn't survive. It was madness, and so I looked around at different businesses. I had a business broker, Jim Goodwin, over in Perth, and I said, Jim, find a business for me. We looked at lots, and I said, I don't want a franchise, Jim. I know how to run a business. I can do that reasonably well. Why should I pay someone else 5, 7, 10%? And after looking at lots, he gave me this sheet of paper with the name whited out. He said, what do you think? I said, yeah, this is interesting. And he drove me up to a bedshed store in Claremont in Perth, and that was my entry to franchising. And I loved it. It's just, I suppose, being a bit systematic from a background, being a quantity surveyor and a builder, where there are processes which are critical. It's just something I've got a passion for. I've been very involved with the respective sort of franchise associations and so on, and helping people franchise ever since. Yeah, and have some of our own franchise businesses as well.
Fantastic. Well, I again, somewhere along the way, you've run into Prue, who's now been with you obviously for a long time, but particularly now the other business that's grown out of it. So Prue, welcome, but also tell me a little bit about Brian touched on it, how you've transitioned into this business that's sort of grown out of it, and tell me a little bit more about your side of the business.
Okay, so When I left government, I ran my own businesses for a while, which were great. And then we retired. We went up to the mid North Coast and retired, and that really didn't last very long. We decided that we were very bored. So that's when I helped Brian to set up Franchise Simply, because I set the systems up for it, taking everything out of his brain and putting it all together. And we started working together, which was an interesting journey.
It was the first.
Yeah, but that was fun. And the experience that I had working with Brian, it really hit me that businesses that came to us went through the first part of our processes where we helped them reorganize and focus, and we helped them set up their franchise system, their franchise operations manuals, if you like. And following that, it was really evident that some people really didn't want to move on from there, because they got immediate return just from that first step. Grew asset value in the business. Suddenly their turnover and profit was enough for them. They didn't want to move on and take on the complexity of franchising and business growth beyond that point. And it made me realize that it doesn't matter what kind of business you are running. If you want to grow it, you actually have to go through exactly the same process. You have to focus and simplify the business 9 times out of 10. And you have to clarify your departments and what everybody does. And then you can't delegate unless you have very clear instructions on why something has to be done, what has to be done, and how it has to be done. And that's the operations manual side of it. From there, Systems2Grow came out of it. I realized that there was room for a separate business working with people who didn't necessarily want to grow through franchising, but they wanted to grow their business one way or another. And it really doesn't matter which model you choose. The process is the same.
It's interesting, isn't it? And because it's sort of a lot of people go down the path then of specifically looking at coaches, and there's nothing wrong with coaches. They have a very definite role, but this is more structural, isn't it, in terms of the approach that you take?
Yes. It's very focused. We do it in 3 parts. The first part is we sit down with people and we go through their business in some detail, and that's where we pull it apart and make them seriously look at their ideal client and where the money's coming from, and what they really need to be focusing on for growth in the future. It doesn't take very long, but that's the first step. Then we take them through building their operations manuals one way or another. That's a task that never finishes, but yeah, it's a good one. And we make sure that they build their operations manuals in a way that's easy for their staff to use. It's not a paper manual that gets left on a bookshelf getting dusty. But the third step is the bit that's really important, and that's the business owner then has to take a leadership position. They have to tie their training into the operations manuals, use them properly. Training doesn't repeat everything that's in the operations manuals. It uses that information. And then they have to make sure that, they make sure that people are using the ops on the job, and they make sure that they're used for performance management. And they must have, like any franchise group, any business that's beginning to grow, they must have a section that's focused on support, that's looking after the people who are delivering the product. The front line is the be all and end all of business. It's where the money comes in. and it's the front line that has to be looked after. So that leadership position which supports people and looks after them, but also is firm and holds the line, this is the way we do things here, and these are your operations manuals and you need to follow them. That balance needs to be taken. It's a growth step that some business owners find difficult.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, that balance between what are systems and people.
Yes.
And really, in this day and age, there is a tendency, particularly with things like AI increasingly coming into it, that people automatically think systems are just automated processes that need to happen. And the reality is they're not that at all, are they? They're more of a guide, and people need to work around them, and you need to they need to accommodate the variations that we all have as individuals.
Absolutely, and we do really focus on the fact that it's people who are going to drive the business for them. So the organization structure that we put up, that they put up with us, is based all around supporting and looking after that frontline group. And the operations manuals are written in a way which is supporting that frontline group who are dealing with the customers face to face. And the leadership is there, the balance between supporting and making sure that things are done properly, all around the frontline group. It's the people on the front line. They're really important. They drive your business, drive the money.
Absolutely. I mean, and speaking of people, I wanted to actually hear from both of you, because this is as you pointed out, there are different entry points that people have in coming to deal with you, and I'm interested in what people recognize as being their pain point that drives them to wanting to look for someone like you, because I imagine that's what's happening, isn't it? People are looking for you. And for the support that yours is quite unique. So perhaps, Brian, from a franchise point of view, what's the pain point that makes people drive and seek out someone like you?
Very often it's the fact that they find it difficult to source and retain good staff that have the same commitment to the business as they have. And whilst there's always going to be a limit, the reality is that that's a challenge. And particularly in the last few years, where there's been lots of attractive offers out there to any good employee, will probably get headhunted, and if you don't look after them, they'll certainly find something else. So, but I suppose what people typically say is you can't rely on people these days. If there's still work done at 5:30, tough. They hang up the phone, walk out the door, and they've gone for the night. And they look for someone that, perhaps the typical term, it hasn't changed for decades. They want someone with skin in the game, because the difference that a personal interest, vested interest has, even subconsciously, is significant. And that's really what they're looking for in most cases. Yeah. And they recognize that franchising is nothing, all it is duplicating the same thing as you've got today, but even simplifying it to make it as easy as possible to be able to expand that business. And that's the main driver for people. People love their businesses, they're the babies, and people who've got a passion and the right skill sets and have taken the right advice and have got the right team around them will often say, this business deserves to grow bigger. I'm doing very well, kids are going through uni, got a nice house, got a nice car, we have holidays, but this business deserves more. And it's the same as giving opportunities for your children when they're being educated. They say, this business could be national. This business could be international, and whilst only a few filter up to the top, we do get people who go through those steps, and that's what motivates them,
Yeah, I love that phrase that, the business deserves more. And I suppose in many senses, Prue, that's probably similar for people coming to you, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's they're looking for smoother training and performance management processes. And what they really want to do is to be able to leverage themselves out of the day-to-day. They want people to be able to do the job without having to manage the detail. and they want time for themselves. They want time to spend on the business, and they want time for family and holidays and all of those other things that go with it. And I guess people heading towards wanting to sell it, they're looking for an exit strategy. So they're looking for an asset that they're proud of and one that they can sell, because as soon as it's systemized and you have operations manuals there, you can sell it for so much more. Suddenly it has a value because you have a bigger market of people to come in and purchase it. And Brian has a good little story there. And I guess the bottom line is they get to live the life they want. It's really important, but I'll let
Absolutely.
Brian.
Well, Brian, she's giving you a good lead in here.
Yeah. Well, one example, there are many, but one that comes to mind very easily was a small business, quite typical, called Superlube. It was in Coffs Harbour. And Doug McDougall was the owner of the business and the founder. He'd been there for about 10 years. He was North American and brought the concept of a literally instant service. So you'd walk in, get a muffin and a coffee, your car would be serviced. And you could eat off the floor. It was classical like that. Every pair of pliers and screwdrivers had a painted outline of where they went. And we prepared Doug's business for franchising, documented it. And his office was upstairs, elevated. They could see what was happening. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with what wasn't a terminal illness, but one that meant he had to take life easier and just couldn't handle the pressure of business. And he sold. And the business broker that sold it for him said he got 50% more because the business was what he called franchise ready. In other words, it was documented, systemized, and he sold his car service business to an accountant. Now, who liked motor vehicles, but normally he said this would have been sold to a car mechanic and they haven't got the money to spend or invest in a business of higher value. And that to me is a classic example. So it's one of many. I've had other clients who've ended up being bought out by a public company because they looked enviously at the way they were outsmarting them with their systems, you know.
What are the systems that you put in place to grow your own?
Okay. Yeah. Well, we've incrementally put systems in place, and I have to thank Prue for that. She's disciplined and well organised in that respect. And look, we invested a lot in consulting with experts in a whole range of things, whether it was learning how to speak from stage, which we were doing in the early days with Mal Emery and these sorts of people at business conferences, those types of things, and then doing presentations at expos and running weekend workshops. So this all meant consulting with different people who are experts in their field. And I think we would not have grown the business with the profile it has without having made those investments, because otherwise you're in the dark, you know, you're really shooting without taking aim. So I think that was a big element of what we've done. And through that, we built up contacts with some amazing people, and people we still consult with or work with today after, 10, 12 years previously, having met them then. So it's building that network. And I suppose getting out and networking a lot in the early days.
I think associated with that was automation. Mm-hmm. And we were early adopters of digital systems, CRMs, and otherwise you can't manage the flow of people coming through the sales funnel. But also processes to manage our staff, to make sure that what they're doing is correct, and very simple processes, just simple things like Trello help us along. We don't like complexity. We get lost in complexity. We like things to be simple for our staff and simple for us. So yes, it was just making sure that the processes were there and that we were following a very structured sales funnel and onboarding and delivery funnel.
And I suppose the point I think need to make to people is that it's not as complicated and difficult as people anticipate to document and systemize their business. People are intimidated by it because they don't know where to start. And there's lots of ad hoc systems out there, but they don't really represent a true reflection of how the business operates. So whilst it's not easy necessarily, it's simple if you follow a good process. And I suppose that's our principle with with the businesses we've had and had previously as well. You've got to have those systems in place so one thing automatically follows another. And if you, such as in our case, we've got guides and templates and videos and podcasts, workshops, you name it. We've got all those resources there to help people. And I think that's what people need to appreciate. And I think the other thing is that it does make a huge difference to their business. We see people who start just doing their systems with a strategic workshop and they change their business model dramatically. Completely. And they say, well, I'm going to finish in 3 months, but 6 months later, they're expanding, they're changing the business model, they come back to us and then it's really phase 2 or phase 3. So it opens up, what it does is inspires people with a new energy and excitement for their business. I think that's a really big thing. It's like a rebirth.
Absolutely. Well, just to wrap things up, I just wanted to ask you one final question, each of you. If there's one thing that you wish people knew more clearly about your business, what is it? What is that one thing that you wish people understood better?
We know that if it's done properly, it can transform people's lives. And that's both businesses. That's because it's the same process, basically. That this business of of giving people the growth and the profit to be able to live the life they want, and to give them the time because it leverages them out of the day-to-day, it transforms their lives. We know that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We're going to include contact details for both of you alongside the notes of the podcast, including, Brian, if you just want to mention it, you've got a book that's out that people can download as well.
Oh, yes. Certainly. It's called How to Franchise My Business Simply. And that's available free from our website. You can pay for it elsewhere. And just go to the website, which is franchisesimply.com.au. So if you just Google that, you'll find it. You'll get a free book. And always happy to have a chat. I suppose to add one quick thing is what people don't realise is that by systemizing their business, the investment is self-funding because it increases their return very quickly.
Yeah, I think that is a hugely important point. And I definitely, encourage people to have a chat with both of you. I know we've had several conversations and we could talk for hours more, but we better leave it there. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on Biz Bites, and we look forward to everyone having your company again on the next episode.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you so much.